All right, so we have Attorney Dobreff here visiting, and before he starts talking with people privately, just wanted to introduce himself and what he does and what his plans are, so that you might know who he is and be able to make better decisions.
Yes, I'm Bill Dobreff. I'm from Michigan. We will be hiring either a local lawyer or Vat, who's not on camera, is going to be a lawyer shortly, and they have a national bar where she can get allowed practice in Ohio, so we can save having to bring in an Ohio lawyer. Our plan is, unlike everything else that's been going on down here, is to file in general individual lawsuits. I think class actions, your claims get lost in the claims. You don't have control over the discovery, and you lose control of your case. However, we may be grouping certain people together, not in a class, but where you have similar problems. In other words, where people have similar health problems, it makes sense to have them together. Or if you're in the same block and your houses have the same problem, it makes sense to where you're not alone and they can see that something else will happen. The other thing is that in general, I believe in sharing information with the clients and between the cases. When we find out something's dangerous and bad, you're going to hear about it right away. I've heard some of the people are not sharing safety testing results with the families. That's crazy. The idea here is to help you get back to where you are, and you do that through a number of ways. We also plan on going beyond just the railroad as a defendant. We're not going to sue the whole universe, but for the major players involved in what's happened here and what's continued to happen here, I think it should be exposed. I've been down here, I've been amazed at how you guys as a group have fought this and how you've stayed you despite this. Some of the families that go through things like this lose it emotionally and physically and can't trust anybody and can't work with anybody. You guys have kind of all stood together here. You are definitely having toxic problems here. The full question is to find out the full extent of what. Dioxin is probably the common known problem, but there's probably other things at work that we're going to try to find out if they exist. If they don't, they don't. The first idea, though, is to find out what's happening and how to control it and see if it's safe for you to stay here, and if not, to make them pay to put you someplace where it is safe. And I don't mean just a hotel, I mean to buy out your house and pay for your contents. The other big question is, how safe is it to move your contents? The actual contents should probably be tested. I had one case, and there was another one that was received huge media attention. I had done a lot of mold and water damage cases. Ted Nugent was one of my clients. He had a house in Kalamazoo that the insurance company paid to send the people in to fix. The problem was they delayed the repairs, and when you delay water repairs, you end up with mold and other hazards. And even when you don't delay it, water is a hazard mover, so it brings all the chemicals and crap from outside into your house. And then the second big thing is the hidden hazards, which you're all going to have, are what's going on up in the attic, what's going on behind the wall cavities. Even if you clean the interior, you still have that. The Nugents, we forced the insurance company to pay to knock down their house and rebuild, and then move to Texas. Now they're having similar problems with this gorgeous palace they built out there, and we're having to sue the builder, and that builder got recommended by the governor. Yeah, I mean, so it can happen to anybody, any place, anywhere. Your strange thing is it's your whole town and in surrounding areas. To me, I can't comprehend in my mind who would make a decision to send a train burning with toxins into a town. Unjustifiable, beyond imagination of being wrong. Then, what I can't even think in my imagination occurs, they made a decision to reburn the toxic trains and cars in your area. Why would you do that? You want to burn it, get it the hell out of this town, put it somewhere else. And I've also found out Michigan has a link to what's happening here. We are, unfortunately, a dumping ground for usually toxic hazardous problems. There was a lawsuit in Inkster out in my area where they sued them and told them stop. I mean, in our area, it's crazy. I don't understand why Michigan's a dumping ground. We have water, high populations. You would think a dumping ground would be a desert. And if they're doing that something that stupid with the dumping ground, I can't imagine what they're doing here. I've literally heard stories how the railroad's taken over the town. I mean, how does that happen? You have a right on so many levels to get your lives back. 2 is to find out what the heck these chemicals are so that you can be tested and treated. I don't know if you've seen, but there's all kinds of problems with delayed symptoms and hazardous reactions. You know, you can have things happen years later. And the problem with a settlement is you only get one. So you want to make sure you know everything before you take whatever an offer is. One of the first cases I handled out of law school was an airline crash in Detroit. And what was happening is the insurance people were coming out and having people settle their cases for almost nothing, not having any idea of what they were worth. There are $1 million cases, they were paying them 50 grand, 20 grand, which is more money than these people ever saw. But how would they know? You know, what goes on here, you had people knocking on doors, signing, having people sign things they have no clue on. The other problem when you sign things is usually there's small print stuff that has all the bad stuff in it that they try to avoid you reading it, or they'll stick it on the back of documents. And even if you can read it, a lot of it isn't understandable to you. You know, and fortunately there's things called fraud, and fraud is a defense when you sign something and somebody lies to you. There's also questions as to liability for governmental entities that are involved in this. In other words, why is the EPA and these other entities telling you nothing's wrong when there's clearly things wrong? Why is your local government letting the wrongdoer control your city? There's a it's called a civil rights action. It's 42 USC 1983, and I'm sure nobody's talked about this. But it allows you to sue government entities and officials when they violate your civil rights. Civil rights would include due process, not taking your property, not putting you at risk of injury, death, and God knows what, and your families. And the other scary part is, the problem is, the exposure risk is not only to you, but anybody you have over at your home, friends that visit you, elderly people, and whoever you sell your property to. I mean, I've had lawsuits where people came in to look at somebody's house that was being sold because it was hazardous, and then they got sick and they sued the owners. How do you not tell them when, you know, you're moving out because of the hazard and you're letting the public walk in thinking everything's okay, and they're going to say, well, the EPA said everything's okay, and if it's not, that's your problem when you're the property owner. Scott's been doing a lot of testing, and his results are drastically different than what the government's reporting and than what other people are reporting. And the excuses are telling him he's using dirty shovels and stuff like that. So we were out with him, and he was filming the clean shovels. He has also invited them to go out and test by him side by side, which is, if you want to show somebody that you're doing it right and they're not, do it side by side and we can see. And they don't accept those offers. I can't imagine what you feel like when you go to bed here at night and remember what you had and where all of a sudden you are now. And it's terrible. It's not only you, it's your neighbors, your family. Jake's telling me that he and his best friend from growing up in school lives, you know, side by side in a house, and they're both exposed. You know, how do you do that? The only answer is you have to engage and you have to find out. And when you file a lawsuit, there's a thing called discovery. And that means you get to find out what documents they have, you get to find out who the witnesses are, and hopefully find people who actually tell the truth. You know, they're telling you this is safe, nothing's wrong. I can't conceive that that's accurate. The testing will show. I don't know why or how the EPA is telling you nothing's wrong when literally Vati and I drive up here, and I've been in toxic environments before, and I can literally tell when I hit your city limits, my nose starts burning, my throat's sore, my chest is bad. We went out to the park last time I was here where they have that hill of dirt, and my symptoms were 3 times as bad as they've been every other time. We went to another homeowner's house, and she has the creek running underneath her house, and I was worse there within a minute than I was at the park for 15 minutes. And in Michigan, they actually have an appellate court case that's perfect on causation. It literally says you don't need a scientist to tell you when there's a hazard in a home, when the homeowners and family and everybody else in there gets sick when they're in the home, and they get sicker the longer they're in the home, and when they're out of it, they feel better. Your problem is that's your whole town. I represented the Nugents, and we got their house knocked down, and Shemaine, Ted's wife, wrote a book, Killer Homes. I think they should be doing a thing about your town called Killer Towns. I mean, this is just wrong. And the real problem is you need to find out everything that's wrong. And they're going to try to blame it. I call it's the anything but us defense. I don't know if you used to remember, there was a show called Get Smart, and he always used to say when he was caught, would you believe? And they come up with a new story. That's what you're hearing here. Would you believe? Would you believe that our tests show it's good? Would you believe it's not the burning thing, it's some other thing going on here in the town that's been here for 5 years? The answer to that is, why did it all start right after the train wreck? Why did it get burst with the reburn? I can't tell you what even went in my imagination when we went and visited with somebody that videotaped the reburn, and he was swearing while he's taking pictures of this burning cloud going, and they were in Pennsylvania, they weren't even here. How crazy is this? And your story has suddenly disappeared from the media. And the way you sell this to the nation is if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And this is a good test to show you can do it. I'm amazed at how the company that's burning and causing the chemical release ends up with their police running around your town, telling people what to do and not to do. We went out and they did testing on somebody's property that was right near the train track. It was amazing. The train company had 9 people standing around the perimeter of it and sent one of their security guards over to tell us what was and what wasn't the property line, and he was wrong. You know, I have reacted worse than I have anywhere else in any other toxic place or mold and other hazards in your town than there within minutes. And I can't imagine what it's like to live here. You know, you have 24-hour exposure, and one of the things that can happen is you can become desensitized, where you aren't experiencing the physical symptoms, but you're still being toxed by what you're inhaling, touching, smelling, and it's in your water. And you have, excuse me, you have a well system here, and they aren't testing the well water. And then I've heard that when they do test it, they test the surface where everything off gases and don't get into the sediment. When Scott tests the sediment, he shows problems. Another question that people ask a lot is, how long will this take? It's unknown. But the more damaging stuff you dig up about what they're doing to you, sooner they want to get rid of you and move on. I recently handled a plane crash, and this is like within 4 months ago, up on Beaver Island, which is up by the top of Lower Michigan, right by Traverse City. And it was a horrible crash where they lost 3 people. One was the dad of a little girl. The little girl survived in dad's arms. I'm representing the wife of a husband and wife that died, and they have separate attorneys. And that, unfortunately for them, the airline involved was one of these fly-by-night operations that has no assets, lots of liability, and they only had a $2 million policy for these 4 families. And the little girl had already had $180,000 in medical bills and building. I got involved and I got everybody talking, and we were able to reach a resolution with the people that lost. Our 2 clients that died ended up contributing money out of their share of the $500,000 that each of them would receive to the little girl to go towards her medical bills. And it was the right thing to do. And it got settled. And the benefit was that they didn't lose all their money litigating with only a limited fund available. In your cases, what do you do? I always tell people settlements are not what you want. They're not what they want to give, but they allow your life to significantly improve. Meaning you put your life back on track. This is not only a train derailment, this is a human derailment where your lives, your homes, your families have all gotten thrown off, and it's wrong. I am not aware of a liability case where they've done things as wrong as they've done in your town. Thank Dr. Ty for letting us meet. The purpose of the meeting, though, was just a brief introduction about me, and I've done all kinds of litigation. I've litigated against vaccine companies with little babies getting baby vaccines, and you want to talk about something that's hard to sell to the general public is that a product that's used on all your children that you had as kids is really dangerous, and that there were safer vaccines and things like that, and they ended up all paying. And with them, it got to a point where we were hitting them with such large verdicts around the country that they ended up making the government open something called the National Vaccine Compensation Fund, where they use tax money to pay for the injuries to people from vaccines. And COVID vaccines are now in that category. That may be what may happen here. They may be forced to set up some kind of a fund, but the problem there is, again, funds tend to mean you aren't treated as individuals. And that's the key to what I try to bring when I represent people. I always tell people when you call, I'm not always able to answer the phone, but I have a staff there Monday through Friday. And I also tell people they can text message me and I'll see that. Lots of times I can't retrieve voicemail because I'm in court or in a dep or something like that, but a text message I'll see. The Vatican is probably a couple months off from being a lawyer, and the benefit of taking the bar now with her is she can take a national bar, where that means she can literally practice in Ohio or get a license in Ohio. If not, we will also be bringing an Ohio lawyer, because to bring a lawsuit in Ohio, I have to have somebody file what's called a motion pro hoc vice, which allows you to practice in a state other than where you're licensed. You basically practice under their license. I would be doing the litigating, but they have to file a motion to allow me to go in.
We live in Pennsylvania.
Same thing. I'd file somebody to do the same thing with Pennsylvania. They're in Pennsylvania, and then they may actually have the option to sue in Ohio or Pennsylvania. We can look at it depending on what's going to benefit them the most. In their case, although the accident happened there, the injury happened in Pennsylvania, and this was not a controlled, this was a multi-state problem, and God knows where all it's went. It got into the water systems. The video of that one gentleman in Pennsylvania showing the smoke, because it happened to be blowing that way, created a huge hazard there, where you wouldn't have expected it.
Yeah, the federal judgment, 30 miles out, it even goes into West Virginia.
Well, so you can file in state courts, and the class actions have what's called an opt-out, meaning they can't force you to be part of it. You can say, I want to go litigate on my own, and they can't force you to stay in it.
So you're doing a mass tort.
I'm not doing mass tort. I'm doing tort litigation that involves a lot of people. And again, the claims will either be brought separately or in small groups
Yeah.
where they make sense. The advantage of if you're linked as a group, say where there's 3 or 4 families tied together, is the cost for that group would be prorated between the 4. Whereas when I'm taking depositions of the defendants, if it's an individual case, I got to take it in each case, or I can notice up one person in 5 different cases. But the expenses that way get divided and would tend to be lower. What the idea is to find out what happened, force it to become known, and force them to settle. You know, they settle when it's no longer convenient for them to do what they're doing. Their game plan, as I can see it, is to try to convince everybody there's little or nothing wrong, to intimidate the people that are on the other side. You guys have the benefit of having a massively high asset entity and or entities, if it's the government involved, where there's a lot of assets out there to handle this. And if there's multiple people involved that are high end, that adds to it too. In the original case, and it was much to my surprise, Norfolk filed a third-party complaint against other people saying it wasn't us or it wasn't all us, it's them too. That's to your benefit, because lots of times that's when the truth comes out, is when the people that caused the problem fight with each other. You've been stuck here too long, and we would try to go as aggressively as possible to get you money as soon as possible, but it has to be an amount that you can live with. And it may be different things, and this is why individual lawsuits allow you to make decisions where you might say, for me, it's worth it to take this amount of money now and go forward with my life. Other people may say, look, I'm afraid of what the long-term risks are here. I want to find out exactly what happened. I want to find out, are my contents okay to move? I want to know that you're going to take the property and I'm not going to be at risk of getting sued by somebody else that buys the property from me. It's huge. The individual lawsuit lets you control the timetable. The problem is when you're in a class action, you have no control. You're on their timetable. I had the airline crash case that I told you about started as a class action for the liability end only. The damage end was left up to each lawyer to handle their own case. And what I laughed about is I was only a first-year lawyer. Within a day, I realized they missed one of the major defendants in that lawsuit. The plane, when it took off, hit a advertising sign for a national travel company. And that part of the plane hit it, and that's where everything went bad. Everybody sued the plane company, the designer of the plane, the airline. Nobody sued them. I was thinking that when this comes to an end, I'm going to file on behalf of everybody else and hit this other target defendant. And all these other people will have had the benefit of getting money where they can live on. And then we can go after this company for additional funds.
Can you split that up? Could you do like property and then do health separate?
Usually you have to bring all your claims in one case. But if we sue certain defendants and then later on find somebody else did something wrong, usually you can go after them too. So you can get your money from the first target defendant and then go after others later, or you can settle with one defendant, get money, and go after others separately. What's fair is pay me for the property damage you caused, pay me for the physical injuries we're aware of, and then protect us as a group from the risks of what may happen years from now, because yeah, literally it's unknown. There are different ways to prove causation. One of them I said is this: in Michigan, there's this appellate decision, which I don't know why it shouldn't apply anywhere else, is I get sick when I'm in the home. This happened after this event. There's this smell that started after this. And my neighbors are having the same problem. People as far as Pennsylvania are having similar problems. So you have the benefit that, when did it start? So you have a temporal relationship. You also have a proximity relationship. The same problem is occurring in clusters within your town and the surrounding areas. You also have the ability of having multiple people being in front of a jury or a judge if they try to throw your case out in advance, showing this isn't one person, this is multiple people who've been exposed to the same hazard with the same trigger time. And when you can have the same findings on tests, which although there may be other explanations why you can have that finding, you're having a cluster.
Okay.
This is how they defend cancer cases. They say, oh, you can have 15 different things can cause cancer. And the answer is, well, why is it all happening here? My dad was a lawyer. My dad was a union lawyer. He was involved with representing Hoffa. He represented multiple unions. He had Michigan's largest settlement for an injury case during his time. It was a tire explosion. My dad basically started me as a lawyer when I was in the womb. I was raised on Perry Mason. I worked in his office. I also got very good training right when I was in law school, and even slightly before. There was a law firm downtown Detroit called Zeff and Materna. They had the highest verdicts nationwide and in our state for a long period of time. I laughed, they even had their own jet. And this guy Zeff looked like somebody out of the movies. He had the gold chains, the open shirt, the hair, and he literally looked like, I can't remember the actor, I think it was Diamond. He looked like he could have been his brother. Mike Materna was the other end of this. Mike was a former prosecutor. I learned about litigating large cases and handling defendants where this is high end. We sued Park Davis and recovered. In Park Davis's case, they claimed, when we started winning these vaccine cases, they claimed all their documents got lost when they moved from Detroit to New Jersey. Fortunately for us, they had a case in Wisconsin where they brought the records forward to show their product wasn't on the market at the time. We got the records for them, brought them back to our judge. Our judge confronted the lawyer who signed an affidavit saying they were all lost. And guess who was the one that produced the records in that case? Same guy that signed the affidavit. We flew out to New Jersey. They had our hotel bugged. We could tell the hotel was bugged because we gave them information about clients that wasn't true. And they asked those questions at deposition. We then went in to their offices and they told us we wasted our trip. And we're like, okay. Don't worry. See these hockey bags over here? They're all filled with your documents. So you're gonna have to explain why they got produced in this case and not the other ones. All of a sudden they had a room full of documents that we looked through. We found out that people died during the testing of their product. They treated them as dropping out of the program. They were testing, what they did was they combined DTP, which is the standard vaccine that you all probably got, with polio, and I called them blender vaccines, and by blending it, the hazards went up. Literally, when we brought these records forward, the settlement occurred a week later because they got exposed. That's what I would hope this type of litigation shows when you go after them. And the benefit is that when somebody does something and tries to cover it up, your chances of being able to do that are really good when there's only one person involved. The more people that are involved, the harder it is to hide that. And where there's different companies involved, it's that much harder to find. And when you start suing your co-conspirators, that's when it comes out. Or you have whistleblowers who pop up out of nowhere and say, this happened to me, I'm not gonna let this happen to anybody. They stand up and do the right thing. And lots of people, surprisingly, have that in them, that they don't care what the threat is when they know other people are at risk and that they can stop it, they'll come forward and help. You know, you pray that you find those people. But the truth has a way of coming out, and it comes out through what's called discovery, where they're required to answer questions. They're required to produce documents. And if you dig hard enough, you hope you find the right stuff. That's how you do it. I mean, I go at people aggressively, and usually when they're telling me something exists, I was in I was in college, and one of my professors talked about being a lawyer. And he said, "You want to be a good lawyer?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Assume everything you're being told by the other side is a lie, and how are you going to prove it?" And if they're telling the truth, then you're stuck with the answer. If they're not, you keep looking and you find it. And I mean, what happens here, everything I hear here makes absolutely no sense to me. It's totally not believable. And it's like somebody's just trying to write a story and make you buy the byline. And unfortunately, it's your lives, it's your property, it's your family, it's your friends, it's your neighbors, it's all of you. It's your businesses. Things can change in a second. Even though you think it's a downhill sled and it's headed to a cliff and you're off, you can change it at any time if you can expose what's going on. And I mean, let me tell you, I fought the drug industry on vaccines. They had the FDA backing them, they had the doctors backing them, and yet we showed what they were doing was wrong. And I can tell you that when we used to do vaccine litigations, any doctor or any expert that stepped up to testify us became a national target. They were targeted by, if they worked at a medical school, they got fired. If they had sources of income, they tried to cut it all off. They were literally, and I'll give you the worst example. There was a guy named Ewan Ross. We thought Ewan Ross was our hero. Ewan did a study in Scotland during a time period where they had high rates of illness, whooping cough being reported, and over 50% of the population wasn't using vaccines. So they wanted to do a big study to show that the vaccines were safe and that it was the disease causing the problems. Ewan Ross did a blind study, double-blind study, and he ended up showing that the risks from the vaccine were 2 to 3 times higher for neurologic injuries, severe neurologic injuries, and death occurring at hospitals within 7 days. Meaning there was 2 to 3 times more likely to have that tied into the vaccine than it was to whooping cough. He then gets attacked in the media. They threaten to fire him from his job. He comes out and writes 3 more articles saying, "No, I did the study, I'm right, the public has to know, this is hazardous." And then, surprise, surprise, in our case, we're representing a family where their child got injured by the baby vaccine. And guess who's on the defendant's expert witness list? It was Wyeth Laboratories. Ewan Ross. He's their expert. I couldn't believe it. I then depose him by phone, and I ask him, "Well, didn't you do this study?" "Yes." "Didn't it show 2 to 3 times the level of severe neurologic injuries and death being tied to the vaccine rather than the disease?" "Yes." "You were attacked publicly by this?" "Yes." "They threatened your job?" "Yes." "You wrote 2 to 3 studies showing you were right and they were wrong?" "Yes." And I go, "Then explain to me why you're on their witness list and not ours." And he goes, "Well, I had a feeling." I'm like, "You had a Barbara Streisand moment, a feeling, and you're a scientist?" And his answer was, "Yes, I woke up one morning and I realized, and every feeling in my being, I was wrong." And I go, "How soon after you started being paid by the drug company did you have this feeling?" He said, "I don't like what you're implying." I said, "I don't like what you're doing. Answer the question." 2 weeks.
Wow.
So that's science for sale. And if it can happen at that level, it's way easier at your level.
Isn't there something where a judge lumped everybody together and said, "Okay, you all have to sue together"? And if so, how do you avoid that?
There's an opt-out, meaning people have a right to say no,
Oh, okay.
and you
Even in the
exercise
ones
your
that are
opt-in.
going on now.
What's that?
Even if you're in, they can opt out and say, "I want out."
There's,
You happen to really look at the judge comes from a Fortune 50 company.
Yeah, well, there you go. The other way to get out.
So you won't be lumped in with the other.
No, and if I did, I opt out and then you're out.
Okay.
But the other way to make you not part of the class is to find ways to make your case not the same as what they're trying to throw you into. Meaning you sue people other than who they've sued. then you're not part of that class. You have different things going on. I pay Scott to do testing on my clients' cases, and then I recover that later on. So one of the questions Scott's asked is, well, what about all this other stuff? And I go, there's parts where it's to that individual home, that test, that's their expense. That shouldn't be expense of you for the testing on your home. However, there can be expenses that would be divided between the cases where he's doing things that benefit all 20 homes, like where he's testing down in the park. That's not individual to your case, but those results may end up helping all of you.
Right.
And the other thing I believe in is as long as the client doesn't say no, is sharing information where you're letting other people know this hazard exists. It's not a lie, and you're not being told the truth. And you can't. You got to sleep at night. How do you conceal safety information from people? It's wrong. And my dad also taught me, you go to the scene, you go see people in their homes. You don't do this by phone. You don't do it by a video visit. That's
he was doing soil samples and he was there.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I've always found out, you find stuff by going out that lawyers that don't won't find out.
Yes.
I'll give you one really weird story. I represented the family of this gentleman who used to be an ex-police officer, and he ended up being found in a field with a contact shotgun wound. He was dead. And he took 2 young boys out with him. He owned a pizzeria, and he took 2 young boys out with him. And they had gone hunting with him and shooting with him before, but he went up the hill and they stayed down. And then when he didn't come back, they went up and they found him laying next to a fence with a contact shotgun wound. I went out to the scene. The police were saying it was suicide. There's a gentleman named Dr. Werner Spitz, who's one of the top forensic experts in the world. He was saying suicide. They weren't asking the right questions. The cops admitted, and the problem was they weren't communicating with each other. The police determined the gun had to have been placed in that position. It couldn't have fallen in that position because there were branches wrapped around it. So it had to be placed there. It couldn't, what the police had theorized was, what Spitz thought happened was he had a downward left or right wound. He thought they held the gun up like this, pulled the trigger, and then the gun fell into that position. Problem number 2, he wasn't wearing gloves. There were no effing fingerprints on the gun. My conclusion, somebody had to wipe that gun. The third thing that happens is when you have a contact shotgun wound and you pull the trigger, you get blowback. The blood goes out of your body and shoots out from the contact point. There was no blood on the gun. Way too many weird things. Then I ended up finding out that the place where the death occurred was out in a field that they used to dump stolen vehicles in. And while I was out there with the young men, a limo shows up, pulls in, and we ran like hell. Dr. Spitz, I ended up cross-examining him, and he's really a good expert, but people get tunnel vision. They'll look at it through one thing, they get locked in, and that's their story. And he and the police had gotten together and locked in and said suicide. Well, he wrote this book that they literally call the Bible of forensic medicine. And I was cross-examining him, and I go, "Doctor, can you please turn to page 38 of your book?" Okay, he does. I go, "Isn't it true you wrote on page 38, in every case of a contact shotgun wound, you must take x-rays of the body because there's no entrance and there's no exit wound?" And he said, and he knew my dad, he goes, "Well, young Dobreff," he goes, "I told you I wrote the book. I never said I read it."
Oh,
He meant it as a joke, but
yeah.
the answers were obvious. He thought the guy fell on the fence fell on the gun climbing over the fence. He ignored the fact that the cop said it had to be placed where it was. So the answer is, just like here, you have to go in, you have to see what the heck's going on for yourself. You have to find out from people who know what they know and what you don't, and then show what happened. And I'm hearing a lot of, just believe us. Without looking, trust us.
Yes,
Which is the last thing you should do.
yes.
You know, these people are doing things here that you just shouldn't allow. They should not be in control. You know, I mean, that they're the last people who should have control over what's going on in your town, what's going on in the testing, what's going on with people. It's
like
crazy.
the fox watching the hen house.
It is.
Yes.
It is. I'm like, when people do something wrong, what do they want to do? Hide evidence.
We found that out whenever they brought in the clinic for us here in Dartmouth.
Yes.
Treat with our doctors?
And-
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're all telling us, well, you're fine. His blood pressure was so high, and they're like, well, it's probably like that normally. It's not normally like that. Like, we left there and went, well, you just wasted our time. Like, you know, you just told us what you thought we wanted to hear. Wait,
No, they thought you would believe.
yeah.
Not what you wanted to hear, what they could do to turn off the knob on the TV, what they could do to stop the coverage, what they do to stop you from talking amongst each other.
Yep.
And it's all unrelated. It's a coinky dink. I heard a story about your town. I think it was CDC, not
Yes,
EPA workers,
CDC.
who were out here telling you everything was okay,
Yeah.
and they got sick.
Yes.
Who are they? Where are they?
Yep.
You should know that. What were the symptoms that they got sick for? Where were they when it happened?
They denied the FOIA request.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. Yep.
you
They
hit
denied
you
the
you
FOIA.
hit them with subpoenas and you'll get an answer sooner or later, and if you have to go up the chain to get it, you get it. Sorry, but we don't have a balloon over Ohio.
Right.
And that video tells
Right there.
the video that, and I can't remember the gentleman's name.
Jim.
We were at his house, and he's out there barefoot, swearing out of just shock of this smoke moving, this toxic smoke moving into his area. Crazy. And how do you separate Ohio from Pennsylvania when you're right on top of each other? That gets right to what I was telling you: sick in, better out. The longer you're out, the better you feel. And it's weird. I've also heard of something. I'm hearing people having withdrawal symptoms where they've desensitized themselves to the exposures, but then when they leave the area, they get sick. Kind of like, you know, when a drug addict gets hooked on a chemical and you take the drug away, within minutes of hitting your town, my nose starts burning, then it goes into my throat. You start coughing up stuff, and when I leave, within hours, I'm better. On two of the times I had a strange thing with my tongue, and I was like, you know, that's bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
And then when we went to that park, it was 3 times as bad as it was anywhere. Well, then you also have homes that have ventilation problems in those that don't. In the mold and water world, in fact, the Nugents had this problem. When you have the crap get in and your ventilation's bad, it holds it in.
I think it's our insulation in my
And
house.
the other thing that's crazy
I got
about
boiler
here
heat,
is
so
your
whatever got in
vegetables.
there, don't get out.
Your vegetables should be tested. The fruit should be tested. This is your market here. And when we drive in, we hit that one T-bone intersection. There's food all being sold out in the open.
Yep.
We actually have Scott testing some of the vegetables and fruit in the areas where we've been. And I don't understand that. And the other problems you have are you're eating animals that are taking this stuff in. And we had similar problems with that out in our area with perch and fish and mercury poisoning in the lake. And the problem you run into is that everything you eat, you're keeping that toxin in, not only from everything you've inhaled, but you then get what you ate from the fish or the cow or whatever. That stays in your system and you can't get rid of it. And then the more you eat, the worse it gets. Every lawsuit is a mystery. there's stuff you need to find out, and you have to look, and you have to dig, and you have to know how to find it. I'll tell you another thing. I literally call your town the Twilight Zone. I literally expect Rod Serling to pop out a door and tell me that I'm in an episode.
Well, that's our theme song now.
It should be.
That's all.
And I laugh, there's a country singer that came out, try that in a small town, and I think that should be your theme song here. It's
Yes.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, number one is they're forcing people into a class action. That's wrong. I mean, if you choose to go that route, fine, you know, that's a choice. If you choose to do whatever, but it should be a choice, none of it should be forced. And you should know the benefits of doing that versus doing it on your own. Like anybody that wants to, I talk to them, I answer your questions. I do tell you this, whether it's me or some other lawyer, it's really good if you get a notepad and write down your questions so you don't forget the next time.
Right.
The other thing that is critical in any kind of litigation is to set up a timeline. And that's a chronology of events. And that you write down when things happen, what you were told, what occurred, and if there's documents supporting it, you point to the document. If you're a husband and wife, it's really good if you do it on your own first and then compare later. But the other benefit of doing something like that is your brain fills in gaps. And you shouldn't do it all in one night, you should do it over a couple of weeks. And you'll find out that when you start making the timeline, you'll start remembering more things. Because that's the biggest thing is you forget over time.
And what do you think you have to offer, bring to the table? That there's a lot of attorneys here, and I'm sure they're.
What I do
I'm sure
is
they're all
that
good.
the people, number one is I tell them the people know who their lawyer is. You're not going to this big firm where you're getting person number 82 on the chain, and then they leave your file and you get thrown over to somebody else, and then they refer it out to another party, and you don't. I get involved. I'm it. If I bring another lawyer in, they're coming in with me and working as a team where you're going to be able to talk to me and find out what happened, what's going on, what are you doing, and where are we going? You know, I mean, the hardest thing is with lawyers is that you don't hear anything back for months, weeks. They come out once and you don't hear from them again. You don't see them. They've never even been here. I mean, how do you litigate this case without coming to this town? How do they litigate your house and they never go to your house? So far, I've been to 4 of the houses, and when people represent me one way or another, I'm going to come down and see your house and videotape it and walk around and see what's in there and see what I think may make your house different than others or what may bring you to the same table. I do it because actually our slogan, and it's one of my former law clerks came up with it, is we make friends by accident. And I view my clients as my friend, and some become like family. And I don't let people do these things to my friends and family. And I stay in it. I don't tell people to settle. I tell people it's your case, and I'll fight it till I drop dead. And if you want to settle, that's okay. But it's your case. And you know what? Nobody knows, I don't care what you're being told, nobody knows your case like you because you lived it. Everybody else is just hearing what's happening. And that's totally different. Totally different. And people will say, well, I know what you're going through. And your answer is, no, you don't, because you haven't had this happen to you. You know, I mean, I'm sure you're being told that by the EPA. You're being told that by Norfolk Southern. Bullshit. In general, I charge a flat 1/3 with costs. What that means is that the money we expend is like an interest-free loan. We get that back off of the top at the end. And usually that's because people that have things like you happen don't have the money to pay for testing. You can't pay for experts. You can't pay for any of that. The lawyer takes it on. And if for some reason I lose, that's my problem. The attorney fee is a flat rate. And in part it's done because life's a gamble when I get into these. But I usually believe in cases I take. Because if I don't believe it's a case, I'm not going to take it. I'll tell the people that. But you guys have crazy cases going on out here. I mean, it's bad injuries, and the question you asked is, well, isn't there a problem with long-term? Yes, there is, because you don't know what the long-term effects of this is, you know, and unfortunately things like Camp Lejeune and all that, you know, they tell people, well, you know, if this happened to you 5 years ago, you can still have problems, and that's true. The other thing is that the exposure is not ending. It's still here. You know, that Times Beach mayor that came out and spoke,
Yeah.
they killed the town. They bought the property, they buried all of their personal belongings, and they killed the town. Like it never happened, it wasn't there. Actually, that idea is a good idea in a toxic exposure case because it gets you out of there. But what I was going to tell you before is this one case, and it was a mold case. The people came in and they cleaned and repaired the entire house. When they turned it back in, it recontaminated the whole house, as bad or worse than it was before. And that's the problem, is this stuff's in your air systems now. It's behind your walls. It's in your carpets. It's on your belongings. Yeah, it's in your soil. It's in your water systems. I mean, you guys do well water out here. It's nuts.
Unless you're the EPA, then it's all.
Yeah.
Well, unless you're the EPA and you actually drink the water like some people
What'd you
did.
say?
And everything's fine.
Right.
Yeah,
Everything's
until you
fine.
drink the water. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
okay.
fine.
Yeah.
Everything's fine when you don't live here and you don't drink the water. My answers is that, you know, I've fought government entities, I've fought big corporations, and I usually get the answer one way or another.
And you're not afraid.
No, I enjoy it actually. I like David and Goliath battles. I think there's a huge advantage to being David in a courtroom where you have a big corporation and a big law firm on the other, and you're there with your clients. Who would you like in that scenario?
Exactly.
Most people I know, especially when you're the one showing what happened and they're trying to cover everything up. I mean, it's bad enough when you do something wrong. It's way worse when you cover up the wrong. And then when you misrepresent the hazards to people. That's crazy.
And dangerous. Extremely.
It is. You know, how do you live with yourself when some of these people die and a little kid gets severely ill?
I've heard that comment a lot of times out of people. How do they sleep at night?
Exactly. Well, we know how you don't sleep at night because of what's
Everybody
happening.
asks them.
I thank Dr. Ty for taking the time and letting us come speak to you. I hope that whatever you do, you make the right decisions and that you get this to an end. But the real goal is to get you and your families into a safe place, and then to make sure that whatever happens in the future, you have some level of protection.
That's all we want.
That's all. You know what is, and people will try to paint you as being money greedy and
Yes.
in it for the money. And you know what the answer is?
Faking it.
The other answer is it isn't your
Damn
family
right I am.
and it isn't you,
My
and you
answer is
didn't
kiss
have the
my
life
ass.
experience. Yeah, that's even a better one. But you know what is, if you're telling the truth, and I always tell people, the truth is what the truth is. If it's harmful, fine, tell it. If it's good, tell it. But usually in cases like this, you're not the ones that need to worry about telling the truth. It's the other end of the equation that's going that way.